Welcome, everyone. I know you guys are all joining in now to our 9th post in the email deliverability series. This is interactive. Anyone with a question, please feel free to ask in the Q&A below. It's going to be a fantastic discussion today with Lori, Beth, and Amanda. I am Jenna Davini. I'm the content marketing manager here at Webula, and I will be your moderator today. With me, we have author of our recent post, Lori Beth Blair, founder of the independent deliverability consultant firm Platonic Ideal. And we have guest Amanda Jackson, deliverability consultant at Iterable. Our topic today is based on Lori Beth's blog, 9 examples of email bounces and how to analyze them. So I want to hand it over to Lori Beth to go over the genesis, and I believe she has some demo for us today.
Yeah, absolutely. So what prompted me to cover this topic is I feel like there is just an absolute wealth of information that can be found in bounce messages. And also just looking at your bounce rate, like really kind of diving through things. And in the example I'm going to show you and in the blog post, I realized really kind of what we're trying to get at with bounce analysis is, are my problems data quality problems? I.e., am I getting a lot of emails bounced because the receiving mail servers are saying that's not a valid email address, or something like that? Or are you being blocked due to reputation issues, which, let's be honest, could be caused by the former if you operate with data quality problems for long enough and you teach receiving mail servers that you have data quality problems, then eventually they may stop accepting your mail. They may decide, well, it's just not worth our time to accept this. So that's what I'm really trying to drive at here. So if you go to the blog post, let me bring that over to this window here. And I'm going to share it. If you want to play along at home, we can do that. Let me do the screen shares. Jenna, I think you're going to have to turn that on for me.
Okay, let me see.
I think it's like in the security settings, but yeah.
Did that work? I made you a host.
Let me try. Yeah, I sure can share. That's not the right window, but that one is. Okay, awesome. So here is the blog post. You can just go to blog.webula.com and look, if you scroll through the recent blog topics, it should be right there near the top. And then so this post, if you scroll down a little ways and ignore most of the content, you're going to see a link here to this handy spreadsheet that Webula has graciously agreed to host for us. So if you just click it, it'll automatically download it. And to save us a bit of time, I've got it loaded here. So this is what you can do if you get an export of bounce files from your ESP. So if you can get an export of the bounce messages, either in a CSV file or in an Excel file, whatever, you can load it. You can get it loaded into either Excel or Google Sheets. Or I do want to make sure people are aware of limitations if you're dealing with really high volumes of traffic, or if you're trying to analyze bounces over a longer period of time. Though I frankly would say recency is very important in email, especially with bounces. It's probably not super valuable to go back more than about 30 days. What I have here is a redacted file of bounce messages for a client for a week that they had. And you can see there's just, all kinds of gobbledygook in here, although we can see lots of stuff talking about, spectrum here. So what I've done is, I've just got this table of data here, and then I've done another tab of the spreadsheet. And what that's doing, the first thing that I do is just count all the bounces with this count off formula. So if you go there, and then it's counting every bounce in this B column here, because you notice some of them, I think there's a few that don't have any message at all. So we don't really want to count those. And that equals up to 100% here. And then what I did is used this formula to count if the bounces contain this text string here, just a single word, but you can actually, if you look like at some of the others, there's spam content. Like if I go, let me not copy that formula there. Let me escape out of that. But this one's spam content. You can do, whole phrases. But what I found with my methodology is you want to keep it to just like the shortest phrase possible that's going to have meaning. Because what you're trying to do, and one of the points that I made in the blog is if you look here, all of these last 5 bounce messages reference the spam cop block list, right? So, but if you also very obviously look, no 2 of them are identical. Why is that? Well, that happens to be because, they don't, no 2 mailbox providers, no 2 mail servers operate exactly identical unless they're owned by the same entity. And sometimes not even then. I've certainly found some examples where that was not the case. So what we want to do is reduce it down to, okay, what is driving the problem? So, in this case, Spectrum is rejecting their mail. In this case, a 550 bounce. In this case, spam content, reference to spam cop, reference to, a block list. Reference to this spamrl.com, which is another block list, things like that. Proofpoint, which is a spam filter. Mailspike, also a spam filter. So what we're trying to get at here is what is driving this client's bounces. And if we look here, we can see 87% of them are at Spectrum or reference Spectrum, which means this client has an issue delivering mail to the Spectrum ISP. So in order to remedy that, like typically, as you can see here, there's a URL, and that's another piece of valuable information that you can get out of bounces. A lot of times they have the URL that you need to go to, or here with spam cop, even though I've redacted part of the IP address, normally you could just follow that link and go to exactly where you need to go to see the status of your block listing and hopefully even unblock it. So there's just a wealth of valuable information in bounces. And that's why I was really excited that Jenna asked me to do this blog.
This is some awesome information, Lori Beth. Amanda, what are your thoughts on this, on the blog?
Well, to begin, I'd like to start with going over the different types of bounces. I know that in the article, it mainly looks at hard bounces, but do you want to sort of discuss the difference between hard and soft, and, as you mentioned, synchronous and asynchronous?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm struggling here briefly to turn off. I can't find the controls on these 3 monitors to turn off the screen share. So I don't know if Jenna, if you can just yank that away, that would be awesome. Yes. But yeah, so I didn't really dive into it in depth in this blog, but typically bounces do get divided into 2 categories, hard and soft. And these are not really like technical categories that mailbox providers or receiving mail servers like impose upon them. They're kind of shorthand for how we in the deliverability community have decided to refer to them. A hard bounce indicates typically that email address is permanently ungood. Like that is a permanently bad email address. And to be honest, you're going to see some amount of hard bounces over time. Like somebody might change their name. They might get married and change their name, and then they, deactivate, one email address and move to another. So some portion of your list is going to go bad over time. But, the reason we do the analysis is because we want to see, okay, what is driving our bounce rate? Like, is our bounce rate acceptable? And if it's not, what's driving it? And then, so hard bounces should be a small percentage of your bounce rate. If you have a high rate of hard bounces, that indicates you have a data quality problem for sure. If you have a high rate, now soft bounces, what they typically indicate is that it's a temporary bounce. Like there is something temporarily blocking your mail from getting to the intended recipient. That could be that their mailbox is full. That could be that you're on a block list, and as soon as you resolve that block listing, you'll be able to get back into that mailbox. So yeah, so just the way to think about it is hard is typically permanent, soft is typically temporary, but there may be action required on your part to resolve the soft bounce. But there could also be nothing you can do. Like if somebody's mailbox is full, I mean, absent going over and knocking on their door and being like, hey, could you pretty please clean out your inbox? I'd really like to send you some marketing emails. And let me tell you, that's just not going to go over great at like 9 a.m. in the morning. It's not always solvable on your end. And that's also part of what the analysis, which of these bounces can I do something about and which ones do I kind of just have to live with?
Right. You have to take a step back and say, is this worth the resources? Is it
also, yes.
Right. So you touched on this earlier when you mentioned that different mailbox providers handle bounces in different ways, and even the labeling or the description of them in that string can be wildly different. What can you tell us about some of these differences that you've noticed?
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly kind of crazy, like how disparate like the bounce messaging can be for what is the same core cause. Because like, something as simple as a block listing, if you look at the blog post, I mean, there are 5 wildly kind of different examples. Now, there is a common thread, which they all reference that spam cop URL. So that's what I decided to focus on in the analysis. I said, okay, I can target that with my keyword search on this column and count how many of those there are that are driving my problem. The other thing, that's what makes bounce analysis hard. And I think that's what drives a lot of people away from it, because they they download it and then they get this file of just like absolute gobbledygook. And it's like, what does this even mean? So, honestly, I would say there are a lot of great resources out there. I think there's the SMTP field guide that will help you with some of the bounce, like what the bounce messages mean. I mean, also a lot of it, I've just had to like dig through web forums. Like I'll just copy paste like any part of the bounce message that doesn't seem to be unique to the actual recipient, like doesn't have like a unique server identifier or something, the most generic part of the bounce message possible. And then essentially search for that and see what information I can find on it. But I would definitely say that that's one of the bigger challenges with bounce message analysis. And I'd frankly say that, a lot of ESPs, as far as how they categorize bounces, that they receive back, from the mail servers they're trying to connect to. I feel like a lot of ESPs haven't really well solved this problem as far as grouping them together. I don't super know that anybody has.
No, and one thing that I've noticed, it's about 50-50 when you see an article that says, here's how to analyze bounces. Half of that information might be right. Some of it touches on correctness. I don't want to call it a hard and fast rule, but I think people treat it as hard and fast as 400s soft. Those are the temporary. 500s hard, those are the permanent. And these spam cop examples that you have in here are a perfect example of when that doesn't exactly match up, and when it kind of just blows that theory.
Exactly. And the same with this
5s, and yet they're just the block listings.
Yeah. And the same with the spectrum bounces too. They're coming back as 550s. That's the other thing I think a lot of senders aren't super aware of, is that, these receiving mail servers that you're sending to, and I'll say this problem's even, it differs a little from business. If you're sending direct to consumers, like, a Best Buy or Ford or Toyota or something like that, if you're sending direct to consumers versus if you're sending to other businesses, just because there's a lot more diversity in business mailing systems. And, there are a lot of grumpy IT admins out there that might have customized the spam filter 8 ways from Sunday to, perform exactly how they want it to. And I've also just found that business mail systems tend to bounce a good bit more email. They also tend to be very rules-based as well. They tend to be a bit more rules-based than like, Google's probably insanely complex AI filtering algorithm that's like always in flux. Oh, and one other point I wanted to drop in is, you know, what you were saying earlier, the other thing to be aware of, it's always changing too. Like these receiving mail servers, they could change what bounce messages they're returning. Or, you know, for example, a few years ago, Comcast was using one spam filter, and now they've switched over to Vade Secure. So
Right.
you might have been getting one type of bounce messages from Comcast previously, and now you're getting bounce messages referencing Vade Secure, which is an entirely different spam filtering system, right?
Yeah, and to add to that, once I even saw it, I won't name names because it was definitely a big oversight on their part. In the bounce string, it referenced lookup rule number, I don't know, I'll just throw out a number 15. You go to the website that it provided, there was no 15 there, and I had to contact their postmaster and say, hey, what's going on here? And they're like, oh, sorry about that. And they got it sorted out, and yeah, we figured it out. But yeah, I mean, the people that create the strings are humans, and there are oversights, and to a degree, I mean, you could really put anything in the bounce strings. I've literally seen one say, you're a spammer.
Yep,
And that's all the information it gave.
I've literally seen something like, yeah, we don't like you, go away.
Mhm.
I've seen,
Really?
yeah, so I think,
Yeah.
oh yeah, really? Well, and that was in B2B.
Okay.
But I mean, here's the thing that honestly has kind of occurred to me. Like the thing to remember is there are real humans behind it. Yes, you know, these spam filtering systems are largely autonomous. You know, and they're analyzing thousands, millions, billions of pieces of mail a day in some cases, but ultimately they're coded and maintained by humans. And these humans have opinions on how senders should manage their email. And that's why, you know, keeping tabs on your bounce rate, managing your data quality is your responsibility as a sender, because mailbox providers and spam filters have decided that that's the entry fee, that's the table stakes. Like that's what the price you have to pay to operate in what they consider to be their ecosystem. Like every time they accept one of your mails, I mean, they're basically, you know, kind of like, I just did you a favor. Don't do me wrong.
For sure.
Well, Amanda, do you have any more questions for Lori Beth? I think
I do. She
Okay.
mentioned B2B, and I was going to use that as a jumping off point for
Okay.
my next question. You mentioned that B2B typically has a higher threshold for what they're willing to accept in terms of bounce rates. B2C, the article said, or you said in the article, roughly under 0.5%. B2B is higher at 2.5%. Why is that? And beyond that, is there a threshold that if you blow past, is that considered abusive by these providers?
Yeah, totally. So I would say the big difference is, if you just look at it logically, like people change jobs more frequently than they change like their personal email. Like I've had the same personal email, like I've had the same Gmail address now for, gosh, probably almost 20 years.
Mhm.
Versus like well, it's maybe only like 2004, but it's been, well, boy, we're coming up on 20 years of Gmail, y'all. But you know, so people, but I've definitely changed. If you go check my LinkedIn, I've changed jobs a few times since then. So I think B2B marketers, you know, people sending into other corporations should just expect there's going to be a certain amount of turnover. I want to say the statistic I heard quoted years ago is you can expect about 20% of your list to go bad every year due to like employee turnover. So if you start with a list of like 100,000 at the beginning of the year and you add no new addresses, you're probably only going to have about 800,000 at the end of that year, even if you've been like emailing them consistently and like not getting a ton of unsubscribes and things like that. And yeah, basically the numbers that I pulled from the blog are kind of based on my experience and what I've seen from top senders. So for direct to consumer senders, like, you know, your Best Buys, your Domino's Pizzas of the world, things like that, you really want to be under 0.5%. because if you're sending a really high volume of email, and I think that's, something senders need to be aware of. The game changes at different scales. Like the more volume of email you're pushing, the more scrutiny you're under, because, from like a Gmail's perspective, you have a much greater potential impact on their system if, for example, you get compromised or something like that. And, somebody puts a malicious link in your email or whatever, like you've got a much wider vector of attack just due to the fact that you're bigger and you're emailing a lot more people, versus, at much smaller senders, you can probably get away with a little bit higher bounce rate than they would let somebody pushing like, millions of emails a day get away with. B2B, and honestly, the 0.5 and the 0.25 number that I provided for B2B percent bounce rate, it really represents like, this is when I look and go, ooh, there might be a problem there. It's not a guarantee. I would say in deliverability, you kind of always want a couple of sources of confirmation to go, okay, yes, this is a problem, or no, it's not. But yeah, this is really just based on my experience. I would definitely say, for a consumer sender, if you get up to the point where you're bouncing, like if you're consistently, so over like, I don't know, the last 2 weeks or 30 days or even more, if you're consistently bouncing 2 out of every 100 emails you try to send, you're probably going to start raising some red flags at mailbox providers. Especially, because I can tell you most of your traffic's going to Gmail, probably 50% or greater. And then you're going to have another like 20% going to Yahoo and another like 10% going to the Microsoft family of free email domains, Hotmail, Hotmail, live.com, outlook.com, msn.com. And you're going to have, maybe another like 5 to 10% at Yahoo. And then, if you're North American, you're going to have a good number of a nice smattering of ISPs like Comcast and Spectrum in there. But, there's not going to be a lot of diversity in where your traffic is going. So if you're bouncing, consistently an amount of mail due to bad data quality, these providers are going to start to take notice. B2B, you can get away with a little bit higher because you're sending to a much greater diversity of mailbox providers, and they don't really share data with each other. So, you can, basically if you're sending to Bass Pro Shops and somebody and you're sending to, Platonic Ideal, our systems don't talk to each other. So I don't know that you bounced a bunch of mail off Bass Pro Shops unless we use like, Google Suite or Office 365 or something.
Right.
But I would say for business to business, if you get up over 5%, though, you're going to start upsetting some receiving mail servers, for sure.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say that the bounce rates or the bounces are just one signal out of dozens upon dozens that are taken into consideration. And generally, like you said, if you see repeated bounces, same addresses, same domains, then chances are there are some other negative signals coming in. It would take really, really strong user engagement to help offset that, which is totally possible. But yeah, chances are if the bounces are bubbling up, something else is also brewing.
Yeah.
We have actually 2 questions that came through, so let me read them to you. So sometimes you'll get the SMTP message about you are sending emails too fast. You can throttle or rate limit accordingly, but do you have an overview of what ISPs like on average number of connections, emails? Can you see that, Lori Beth?
Yeah. And I actually do have an answer because I've encountered this one before, and I've done a little bit of MTA tinkering myself and advised clients on MTAs. So Victor, I'm very sorry, but I don't have a happy answer here for you. There is unfortunately not a like general guidance. It varies by ISP. An example, and it can change. So live example, I was working with a big theme park sender, and they were managing their own MTA in the cloud. So they had full deep access to configurations and things, but they also had the responsibility to manage those configurations, which meant when Comcast changed their guidance on how many times an IP could connect to their MX servers per minute, I believe it was, They changed it from like, and typically that's how it works. It's not based on, it's going to be based on the MTA and how many connections the IP bound, or, you know, a single IP bound to that MTA tries to make to a receiving mail server per minute typically. So Comcast like changed their guidance from, it was 50, or they changed it from 100, they dropped it in half down to 50. So you could only connect. And yeah, what would happen is you would get bounce backs saying you're trying to submit mail too quickly. And I've seen this also with like BT Internet in the UK. I've had this issue. And frankly, the answer is, you know, typically this is, unless you're managing your own MTAs, this is something your ESP should be handling for you. And especially very high volume ESPs, they're very well plugged into what these limits are and also how to tune their MTAs. So it like backs off. But yeah, I will say, unfortunately, if you're managing your own MTAs, God bless you. That is a full-time job. And it's, unfortunately, it's kind of constantly in flux because Spectrum or Comcast or even Google or Yahoo, anybody at any moment could change. Yeah, you know, we used to let you connect 100 per minute, but we're going to drop it to 75 or 50 or 25, whatever we feel like today. And also there's how many email packets you can hand off per connection too. So I think it's like, I think the standard is either like 100 or 1,000, but some mailbox providers might not accept that. So it's all about watching that incoming bounce data and making the relevant adjustments to the MTA. So my best advice would be, if you're not managing the MTA and you're a customer of an ESP, I would contact them if you see bounces like that. You know, use the bounce analysis file that I did and say, hey, this is driving X percentage of my bounces. I think it's relevant. You need to do something about it.
And on the, I'll add to that, sort of to add insult to injury for the unhappy answer is, oftentimes that's driven by reputation as well. You're sending reputation, which I know we have all run into the Microsoft issues that specifically quote IP reputation, and you have to do that dance with them where you get where you request mitigation, so they'll up your rate limit and sort of do a reputation reset, or you know, just kind of a level set. So
yeah, very, very true. Microsoft, absolutely notorious for this, because yes, you're right. They will, yeah, Microsoft, I think, like kind of dynamically determines how much email they'll accept from a particular IP per ratum per period of time. And it's constantly in flux, and you kind of just have to watch the feedback and go, oh, all right, let's dial it back, let's dial it up, you know, etc.
We have one more question. I may have missed it, but at what point should we consider consistent soft bounces a hard bounce and cease mailing that contact?
I gotcha. I was gonna say, this one I feel like is almost like a religious debate in the community. Really, this is like, I don't know if we want to dive into religion this early in the day for some of y'all. You know, the first platform that I worked for, the way that they did it is they would consider if an email address soft bounced 3 times in 21 days, they would consider it or terminate it in a soft bounce, because they had this like retry logic. And I feel like most ESPs do. Like, so for example, you know, you're using your ESP, you push send on the mail, you know, you're trying to send 1,000 emails or 10,000 or 100,000, whatever. You know, it's going to queue those up in the MTA and try to deliver them. Well, if they get a soft bounce that the mailbox is full, they're going to retry that same email connection to deliver that email without you having to intervene in most cases. And it's going to retry it over an increasing timeout period. It's like, oh, all right, you didn't accept it minute 0. Let me wait a minute and try again. Okay, still getting mailbox full. Let me wait 30 minutes and try again. And it's going to keep doing that. So, you know, I want to say our soft bounces would retry, and it was configurable by the deliv team, but you could like, our soft bounces would retry the same email delivery for like 3 days or something like that. And it would try, you know, a number of times over that like 72-hour period. But yeah, I really think it's I'm not sure there's a hard and fast answer to this one, like as far as when you should consider it not good anymore. I would also say sending frequency matters as well. Because if you're not, there's a reason that a monthly newsletter is a thing, is because you really ideally do want to hit your list, everybody that you consider an emailable contact, you want to hit them once every 30 days, I would say, to make sure that, if somebody was previously soft bouncing due to mailbox full, you actually catch it if they start, mail bouncing because that mailbox got deactivated or something, right? You want to make sure you're periodically checking in with them. I would also say, yeah, if your soft bounces if your soft bounces aren't pushing you to an unacceptable ratio of bounces to deliveries, i.e. you're a consumer sender and you're not over 0.5%, probably wouldn't worry about it too much. But if you start to see an elevated bounce rate, that's when you might want to look into, oh yeah, we've tried to send to bob@gmail.com 100 times and he's soft bounced the last 90 saying his mailbox is full. Okay, that's probably time to stop sending to Bob.
So, Amanda, do you have anything to add there before we wrap up final thoughts?
The only thing I would add there is, like everything else, that can differ by provider as well. For instance, if you're looking at bounce reasons and you see a lot of mailbox full, we'll go with mailbox full. So that means something very different at Apple mailboxes than it does Gmail. Apple's storage that they give you, assuming you're not purchasing larger amounts of storage, is quite small in comparison to what you get with Gmail. And so it's a lot easier to fill up a mailbox. So usually you would say, oh, mailbox full. That means maybe that's a burner address that someone just uses for coupons or for sale emails or something. That's not necessarily the case with like Apple. I think it would be unsafe to make that assumption. That may just mean that they're sending everything on their phone. They're using that as their backup storage on their phone, and it just fills up really quickly. But with Gmail, you've got a lot more storage to play with, and a mailbox full may truly mean that, hey, this mailbox quite possibly could be abandoned because it takes a lot to fill up the I can't even remember what they give you. We'll just call it 50 gigs.
I think it's like, yeah, it's either 2 or no, it might be like 10. Cause I know I finally hit the point with my like 04 Gmail that I was like, all right, fine. I'll pay you the $2 a month for more storage. Cause I don't feel like going through and deleting college papers or whatever at this point. But yeah, that's an amazing point. Cause I was not aware of that with Apple today. I learned something. Take note, y'all.
By and large, the biggest reason for bounces I see with Apple is the mailbox full.
Yeah.
Sure.
I've seen that. I've seen that for sure as well. So yeah, I think the most important thing is check, are your bounces overall within an acceptable range? And yeah, absolutely break them down by mailbox provider that you're sending to, especially if you're B2C, or, business to consumer, it's a lot easier because you really only are going to have like 4 or 5 mailbox providers you super care about. Or you're basically going to have 4 plus a group of like everybody else together. And yeah, it does depend a bit on where the bounces are coming from. The other thing I thought of is, look at other data, build some segments and or look at other data about the subscriber that is like soft bouncing due to mailbox full or something like that. Like look at, has this person ever bought anything from us? Like when was the last time this person hit our website up? Like, because you could also just that could also just be a signal email's not their channel. Like I know we're all email people here, but sometimes we have to accept whoever we're trying to send to, they don't love email the way that we do. And we need to respect that and send them text messages instead.
Fair point. All right. Final thoughts, anything that you wanted to add that we didn't cover? Amanda, if you want to go first, and then we'll end with Lori Beth since she was the author.
Well, I know that we went back and forth on a lot of things, and I think it's probably evident that we just scraped the surface on this topic, that you could go really, really deep. And some of us do sometimes, and you can get lost in the weeds. But I feel like this was a really good introduction to the topic for those that are just getting into this line of work, or just starting to pay attention to the health of their email program. And I think this will give people a good jumping off point on how to explore some of the deeper, maybe less regular issues that we sometimes see.
Sure. And like we talked about yesterday, maybe there's a part 2 in the works. Lori,
Yeah. I do want to point out a couple of limitations with the spreadsheet resource that we're providing for y'all. Just be aware, Excel is limited at 1 million rows. And depending on how good your computer is, it may start to choke on it well before then. And Google Sheets is limited to 5 million cells. But again, it'll kind of start to choke on it before you even get to that point, unless you got a nice beast machine. So the part 2 I might be working on is how to do this in SQL as well. I mostly just use like MS Access or MySQL or something, but you can load the balances into a SQL table and execute queries against that, because the point of the spreadsheet resource is, I think, Jen, I forget if it was Jenna or Amanda, made the point, it's really easy to get lost in the weeds with deliverability. Absolutely. There are 1,001 ways to waste your time in deliverability, and bounce messages can absolutely be one of them. And the key thing that I want everybody to take away is, use this resource to analyze what's driving your bounce messages. I mean, also, if you look at the top, couple paragraphs of the blog post and you're like, oh, well, my bounces are always like 0.25%. I'm a big consumer sender and I'm, under 0.25% of bounces. Girl, don't even read the rest of the blog post. You don't need it. You're good. Like, I mean, it might be helpful for you, or, come back if it ever gets higher than that. Though that does make a good point. We can provide you some general guidelines, like, okay, if you're below 0.5, you're probably good. If you're below, if you're a B2C sender and you're below 0.25, you're probably good. If you're over 5%, time to start panicking, right? But everything is relative to your own past performance as an email program. So, for example, if you're down there on 0.25% and you spike up to, 0.49, just below half, just below 0.5%, you might go, oh, well, I'm below 0.5%, I'm fine. But in reality, your bounces have doubled. Say if you look at like, your September versus your August stats or something like that. So it's always important to compare yourself against yourself as well. Like, how is your individual email program trending? But yeah, and I just want to, give thanks to Webula for putting this on and say, one of the most important things that you can do is validate your data before you send to it, before you ever send to it. Validate your data. Talk to the people that have this expertise and this database full of knowledge about whether or not an email address is good, bad, or just something gross you don't want to send to, because there are threats out there other than bounces. Bounces aren't the only threat. Mm-hmm. But bouncing a lot of mail off a provider is a great way to show them you don't actually know their users. Like, especially at the B2B level, I've seen instances where, like, I had a client trying to send to a corporate domain, and literally after 20 hard bounces due to, like, that's not a user, that's not an email address here, the system just said, okay, no more from your domain today. I'm not going to trust anything you send me for the next 24 hours because you're just guessing at email addresses. You may have bought a list. I don't know. I don't want to take it. You're in timeout now for the next 24 hours. So, that's why data hygiene is absolutely important. And again, if you haven't sent to a segment of email addresses in over 30 days, absolutely imperative that you validate it before you try to send to it. Like, because email is a very, what have you done for me lately, reputation system. It's very much priority on recency, because one of the main things that their, mailbox providers are trying to do is they're trying to protect and also, delight their users, right? So, and as threats are always emerging, as I said, there are people behind this, there are people trying to protect you from threats launched via email. So these systems are kind of always in flux, always evolving. And it's really important to just, keep your eye on the metrics and keep your data honestly as clean as possible.
Couldn't have said it any better. Thank you, Lori, Beth, and Amanda for joining me today. Join us next month with Melissa Lambert from ConvertKit as she discusses spam traps. That vlog went live yesterday. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Bye, everyone.